Hello and welcome to the Tennessee Informer. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I talk a lot on this show about abuses of the Constitution, whether it be a case of distorting the original intent or ignoring it altogether. One of the most blatant examples is the abuse of our military in wars not declared by Congress. World War II was the last one we actually followed the Constitution and had Congress declare war. Not a one of the conflicts we've been involved with since have been constitutional. That has to change. Here to talk about that topic and legislation to address that is Dan McKnight. Dan is the chairman of Bring Our Troops Home, an organization Dan founded in 2019 that is composed of veterans of the global war on terror and their civilian allies who are dedicated to ending America's involvement in endless wars in the Middle East and other places. And they want to bring our troops home. Their mission statement is, "We insist that the Constitution of the United States be respected and enforced, requiring a formal declaration of war by Congress before U.S. military forces are deployed into combat overseas. We are committed to returning to a foreign policy befitting a limited government, a republic, one that puts America first. To achieve these goals, Bring Our Troops Home will utilize public education, political action, and legislation, including passing the Defend the Guard bill in state houses across the country, including here in Tennessee. Serving in the global war on terror opened Dan's eyes to the gross misuse of the men and women who proudly wear the uniform and serve our republic. He is on a mission to force Washington, D.C. to end these undeclared wars and commit to reclaiming the congressional enumerated power to declare war. Dan served 13 years in the U.S. Marine Corps Reserves, the U.S. Army, and the Idaho Army National Guard, including a National Guard response and support mission during Hurricane Katrina, as well as an 18-month deployment to Afghanistan as part of Operation Enduring Freedom. Dan is a high school football coach, owns and operates businesses with his wife, Andrea. He's heavily involved in local Idaho politics and rides mountain bikes in the Idaho foothills with his dog, Lexi, and Mr. Johnny Cash. I like that name. Dan, thanks for being with us tonight, and how are you doing?
Dave, thanks for having me on, man. That intro actually makes me sound way more interesting than I really am, but thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, appreciate what you do. You're doing something very important. You and your organization have taken on the military-industrial complex over a very important issue that has to be addressed if we are to restore our country. I mean, that's the bottom line. I don't think most even understand the aversion the founders had to a standing army and why presidents should not be the ones deciding if we go to war. Can you give us a little history on this, if you would, about how it was supposed to be?
Well, I'm glad to. Our founding fathers deliberated on this issue probably more than any other. The ability to take our nation and change the condition from one of peace to one of war. They knew from their experience that kings and presidents and executives were most prone to war, right, and most hungry for it. And they were the ones that were most willing to use it to achieve their goal. And so they smartly vested the power to change our country into a state of war with the representatives of the people, so that if our country does go to war, it is done with the informed consent of the populace, of the citizens, of all the members of the United States of America. And we used to do it really well. We used to have Congress even approve small operations. Right. But then after World War II, 1942 was the last time we declared war against Hungary, Bulgaria, and Romania. Since that time, Congress has kind of wiped their hands and said, war's not popular. We don't want to put our name on it. We don't want to have to go home and answer to our constituents. And so they've abdicated that responsibility to the executive, and look what's happened. Let's just really quickly count down: Korea, Vietnam, Grenada, Panama, Desert Storm, Iraq, 1, 2, and 3, Afghanistan, Yemen, Syria, the Horn of Africa, Djibouti. I could go on. There's 77 conflicts that we can find that Congress has washed their hands of and let the executive branch take us into war. And that's not the way it's supposed to be, and that's why we're fighting to get it back to where our Constitution outlined.
Yeah, and one thing on that, since the end of World War II, right, pretty much after the end, we were in a Cold War, and of course Korea and Vietnam were hot versions of that Cold War where we were opposing communism, worldwide communism. At the same time, we didn't really do much about the communists in our country. We certainly haven't since the mid-50s. And it's like, now communists used to be called out, and now they run for office, and they pretty much run the Democrat Party. Not that the GOP is a whole lot better. That's pretty much a gang of progressives. They're just not full-fledged communists. And then with the so-called war on terror, we have more Islamists, hardcore Islamists, jihadists in our country today than we had in 2001. So we go all over the world fighting them, but we let them just do whatever they want here. It's ridiculous.
We have a phrase that we like to say: we can't be the nation that invites all and invades all, and we're both, and it's failing. You can tell by the counterinsurgency policy that went on through the second half of the global war on terror. Every time we would kill, kidnap, or take one of the terrorists off the battlefield, all of his neighbors and family would join the fight against us. And that's because we were there in their country, invading a sovereign country, fighting people that weren't even from that country, and we were creating enemies. It was our own doing. Not that I'm saying that going there to war was our own fault. 9/11 was clearly not our fault, but we responded to a threat with a very limited authorization to go and kill and capture everybody that attacked us on 9/11, everybody that helped plan the attacks, to capture Osama bin Laden, and then to get the hell out of the country. And what happened was that by February of 2002, we were done with the mission, except for Osama bin Laden. We got him in 2011, and we stayed. President Bush took his eye off the prize. He lied us into another war in Iraq. And for a short period of time, we had thousands of troops in Afghanistan, absent a leader. And that's when I was there. And we struggled with changing missions daily. And we were fighting people today that were our friends yesterday because of some bad policy decision. And then you come home and you see that the borders are just wide open. And the countless numbers of the people we were fighting against are here in the country.
Yeah, we bring them over here. Our government brings them over here. It's ridiculous. It just infuriates me and every thinking person in this country.
Thinking is the right answer, the right word there. You're right.
Yeah. So let's talk about the defense. Now, so your mission, though, we're going to talk about the Defend the Guard bill in a second, but your mission is not limited to the Guard. But the Defend the Guard bill, I guess, is the main legislation that you guys are currently pushing. Let's go ahead and get into that.
Sure. If you'll let me back up just a little bit to get to what Defend the Guard is. My story started in 2005 when I was a member of the National Guard deployed to Afghanistan as part of 82nd Airborne and 10th Mountain Division. And the National Guard being involved as an expeditionary force was a relatively novel concept for the United States. But because of the pace of the mission and the size of the efforts, they were trying to incorporate the National Guard at a heavy level. And while we were there, nobody wanted us. 10th Mountain didn't want us. 82nd didn't want us. We were considered part-time soldiers, even though we were the best equipped, trained group that I'd ever been a part of. And I'd been in the Marines and the Army. And the Idaho Army National Guard aviation unit I was with was the best I'd ever been with. But nobody wanted us. And I had a team of 12 National Guard soldiers, German Catholics from Wisconsin, that I was in charge of. And we got off the base as soon as we could. And we went out to the farthest reaches of northeastern Afghanistan to build these forward remote posts. And after about 60 days, our boots were worn out. Our uniforms were worn out. Our body armor was failing. We couldn't get supplies. Nobody. 10th Mountain, 82nd Airborne, National Guard, nobody would help us. And I got frustrated, and I climbed to the top of a mountain deep in northeastern Afghanistan and got a real clear signal on a satellite phone. And I called the only person that I knew who to call. I was angry. I called the governor of Idaho, and he answered the phone. And I said, Governor Risch, my name is Dan McKnight. I'm a sergeant in the National Guard. I'm in Afghanistan. I hope I have your attention. He promised me that I did have his attention, and I told him what was going on. He responded. He goes, Sergeant McKnight, I know I'm the Commander-in-Chief of the National Guard. I've only been the governor for a minute. I was just appointed a couple weeks ago when our other governor went back to D.C. to work in the Bush administration. He goes, but I understand the Constitution. I'm going to do something. I hung up the phone, walked back down to my base, and 48 hours later, my battalion commander essentially kicked my door in, screaming at me, wanting to know who I had called, and told me that I had an entire shipping container of supplies that we needed on the way from Idaho. And then he took away my satellite phone. So that's how officers are. They're a protectionist club. Yeah. They only care about them and their success, especially when you get above that field grade level. And so I held Jim Risch, my governor, up in high esteem. I thought he was somebody that really understood the Constitution. And we came home. I was hurt. I was removed from the military, retired honorably. Before I say removed, I should probably clarify that. And then I went underground, angry, grew a long beard, got real heavy and real unhealthy, very angry because of what we'd been doing in Afghanistan and the changing mission and the interference by the State Department and politicians and the abdication of responsibility, all of it. But in 2019, there was this crazy orange man that came down this gold escalator that was talking about these stupid wars, and I started listening again. I started paying attention. I'm like, somebody's saying the things that I feel. And at that 2019, the Republicans retook control of the Senate, and my friend, the governor, was no longer the governor of Idaho. He was now the chairman of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, the second or third most powerful man in the entire country. And I thought, I've seen my friends go back to war over and over and over and over again. I'm going to ask him to use his position, just give peace a chance, advocate for peace, bring our troops home. And I wrote an op-ed. I didn't know how to get a hold of him anymore, but I wrote an op-ed with my best coloring crayon. You know, I'm a former Marine. We write with crayons. And my local newspaper and 8 others in the state published the op-ed asking Senator Risch to advocate for peace. And he came to Idaho at a Chamber of Commerce event a week later, and I went there with a friend of mine with a camera, and I said, when I pop up and ask him a question, you start filming. And sure enough, I jumped up and asked him a question. Senator Risch, my name is Dan McKnight. Stop me right there. He goes, Dan, I remember you from 2005. I read your op-ed last week, and I agree. We're done with nation building as long as I'm in this position. I thought, my God, this is easy. Politics is simple, right? You just have to ask the right people. Well, Jim Risch, he went back, got on a plane, went back to Washington, D.C., and voted 3 times in the next 90 days to extend the wars indefinitely in Afghanistan, Yemen, and Syria. Yemen and Syria. And so I got frustrated, and I raised a little bit of money. We took 100 veterans from the Global War on Terror back to D.C. to go make our case to Senator Risch and his friends. And all of us, all 100 members of our little group that went out there, sat down with our congressmen and senators and asked them to please, let's advocate for ending the wars, reclaim your authority from the executive branch, never let presidents from any party take us to war without your approval first.
Right.
And all of them put their arm around us. You know, we support the troops. They took a picture with us, gave us all the platitudes, and then kindly escorted us out of the office, except for one. And bless her heart, she told the truth. Liz Cheney looked us dead in the eye. And she says, listen, as long as I'm in this seat, we're never coming home from Afghanistan. And so we thought, you know what? I can't fight this fight in D.C. The swamp is too rotten. And so we went back to Wyoming. We organized and went to every county in Wyoming and helped defeat Liz Cheney. It took us 2 years and beat her by 40 points. And decided the fight needed to happen in the states. Yeah. And then we found Pat McGeehan, delegate from West Virginia, who's now the majority leader in West Virginia. And he'd been running this bill called Defend the Guard for a couple of years. It was poorly written. It was a great concept, but it hadn't been molded yet. And essentially, Defend the Guard says that the National Guard, and I'm going to use Tennessee here for conversational purposes, the National Guard from the state of Tennessee shall not be released into federal service to go overseas and fight in a war unless Congress has first declared war. Yep. That's the entire essence of the bill. And Pat had been running it for a few years, and we took it over and from Pat, and he's a great ally. And we went from West Virginia in 2019, and this year we're in 30 states. 30 legislatures have taken up the bill, including Tennessee, where the great delegate Michelle Renault is our sponsor. She's our prime sponsor, and she is battling every day. This is not an easy lift. We are fighting the deepest of the deep state, the largest bureaucratic entity in the entire world, the Department of Defense. And all we're asking them to do is to ask Congress to do their job. If it's so important that we're willing to spill American blood and treasure in a foreign land, Congress should take the time to put their name on the line before we put our boots on the ground.
You mean actually uphold the oath that we all take? Is that what you're talking about?
That's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
That oath means something to guys like you and me.
Yeah.
We promise that oath with our own blood. They promise that oath with a promise of re-election. It's different for them.
Yeah. Well, you know, you mentioned the Orange Man and talking about getting out of the endless wars. I think it was, I don't know if it was towards the end of Trump's first term or if it was maybe when he was out, but he mentioned the fact that all those years we'd been in Afghanistan and none of those senior leaders had a plan to win. Their plan was just to have a successful rotation. You know, minimize casualties, inflict as many casualties as possible, but to have, you know, their game plan seemed to be a successful rotation.
That's exactly right.
Okay, we're fighting. You know, we're fighting to end it. Here's how we're. You know, this is a strategy that we're going to. You don't end it in those kind of countries.
No, absolutely not. And I used to attend the daily battle update briefs where we would pass information up to our battalion commander, and then he would pass it up to the division commander. Division would pass it to the Department of Defense, onto the White House, and then you'd read the newspaper the next day. All is well on the Western Front, but we had troops that were dying. We had missions that were failing. We went from when we first got there. We landed shock and awe. You remember all that? Everybody remembers that strategy, right? We're going to bomb the hell out of them, and we're just going to shock and awe. Yeah. We'll be out of there in 6 months. Well, when I was there, we got away from that. The largest offensive operation ever in Afghanistan when I was there, called Operation Mountain Lion. Yep. And the next week, we were in provincial reconstruction. the next week. So we went from shock and awe, chasing bad guys across the Pakistani border, and then building schoolhouses and water wells and preparing for the next free and fair election in Afghanistan. And then we turned the schools over to the Taliban. And then we went to counterinsurgency. And then we went to winning hearts and minds. I mean, well, I was there for 18 months. We had 4 different strategies, 4 different commanding officers, none of them accountable for the lives that were lost, none of them accountable for the ultimate failure that we experienced there.
Yeah. To include the pullout at the end, and then that was, of course, the commander-in-chief and all the others below him that allowed that to happen.
Lloyd Austin and Mark Milley should be tried for those crimes. I'm telling you, those two botched that, and they had the balls to say in front of Congress that they regret nothing from that pullout.
They regret nothing. Wow. So
because they were busy putting on drag queen story hours at military bases across the world. They had more important missions to take care of.
Yeah, and they wanted to figure out what the whole source of white rage was. I think that was Milley's.
Milley.
Yeah, that guy's pathetic. He's just absolutely, he's a disgrace. So let's talk specifically about the Defend. I mean, there's not a whole lot to the Defend the Guard bill. It's basically, hey, look, don't send the Guard unless Congress declares a war. Now, even then, I question whether or not the actual Guard should deploy overseas. I mean, me personally, I think that's probably, I'm like, deploy them to the border, which all of our units should have been on the border for the last 20 years. But do you remember when Trump was talking about putting them on the border during his first time in, and he did put some, Milley and all these other generals acted like that was a waste of our resources, like, well, why would we put them on our border? We've got missions overseas. It's insane. It's absolutely insane.
Border security only means something to about 75% of the politicians when it's somebody else's border. And a great example of this, last year when Defend the Guard passed the Arizona Senate, it was getting ready to be transmitted to the House, where it would have been taken up that week. And if it would have passed, it would have been on Governor Katie Hobbs's desk within a couple of days. When this was all happening, she was in Oman, the Middle Eastern nation, Oman, signing a de facto treaty with the Sultan of Oman, committing the Arizona National Guard to securing their border.
What?
Instead of worrying about the border, this is a fact, this is the God honest truth. Instead of putting the National Guard from Arizona on the southern border with long rifles pointed south and stopping the actual invasion on the border, she was committing National Guard troops to the country of Oman.
Can a state even do that?
No, your state cannot enter into a treaty, but they've got this cute little program called the State Partnership Program, where every state has multiple nations around the world, where we train in that section of the world with that country. They're the host, and we go there and train. The concept is that if there's ever a skirmish anywhere in the world, that we've got allies pre-positioned and the National Guard can respond. And so I'm going to push back a little bit. I think the National Guard should fight and win America's wars. I do. But they should be declared, and they should be actual threats to America.
Right.
And it should be declared by Congress, because the National Guard exists for 3 purposes. If you refer to the Constitution, the militia clause says to repel an invasion, to put down an insurrection, and to enforce the laws of the Union. Well, a declaration of war by Congress becomes the law of the Union, the supreme. It's the most important one. And so if the National Guard is going to go fight, we're just asking that we just do it with a proper declaration.
Right.
But other than that, they should be at home for our primary homeland defense and aiding in emergencies and national response all around the country instead of Oman.
Absolutely. I just, that's ridiculous that they have a partnership with these other countries. So in Tennessee, the bill is, like you said, being carried by Michelle Renault. And we do know it's House Bill 0129 and Senate Bill 0156 by Senator Hensley. It's not scheduled yet, but it's assigned to, it is assigned to the various committees. I think on the House side, it might be I thought that was a Public Service Committee, but I'm not sure.
It's in a subcommittee right now on the House side.
Right, it's not actually scheduled. So what are you hearing about the reception that the bill in Tennessee is getting from the legislature?
Sure. So there's always multiple receptions, right? There's the reception by the voters. There's the reception by the lower enlisted and the rank and file in the military. And then there's the reception by the politicians who are kowtowing to the 1- and 2-star generals who are paid lobbyists. The Military National Guard Bureau, who sends their 1- and 2-star generals in to the legislature to lobby on taxpayer dollars, they don't like this bill. They threaten the state legislatures that if you consider this bill, if you pass this bill, if you enact this bill, We're going to strip hundreds of millions of dollars of resources and pay from the federal government, from your state, and take it and go put it in another state. We know the threat's baseless. We know it is because there's all kinds of federal law that preempts that kind of thing. The Anti-Impoundment Act, I think, is one of them. And anyway, there's all kinds of laws that says they can't do what they say they're going to do, but they do it to scare the legislature. And so the legislature just gets right in line because, A, most legislators aren't going to dive this deep into what they consider a federal issue.
Right.
But I'm here to tell you, all politics is local. And if you don't understand that the 10th Amendment and the Constitution and the enumerated powers gives all the power except those expressly defined to the federal government, to the states and to the people, not to the states, to the states and the people. And so if a state is not willing to stand up with some courage and interpose between an overreaching federal government and their own militia, their own National Guard, then what good are they? And
Absolutely.
so we find the legislators with the best spine, the strongest, most resolute belief in the Constitution, and we make them our champions, and then we go to war for it. We fill committee hearing rooms. We help write legal briefings. We write op-eds to the local newspaper. We phone bank the hell out of the opposition in the legislature, and we do everything we can to make sure that our champions know that they're the general of this army, and we're there to support them.
But the actual generals and the politicians seem to be, at least some of them seem to think that, it's more important to be able to send their guys overseas.
Yep, absolutely. So, generals create generals, right? And the only way you get your first star by, it's a political appointment. It's not by merit. Once you rise above the flag rank officers to get that star, it's a political appointment. And every star after that is not merit-based. It is political affiliation, and you have to be supported by some politician in charge of the FedRec board. And so generals, they do really well when they have yes men working beneath them. And what does that do? That creates more in their own image. And so you get a bad general at the top that's got a trailer full of generals behind him or colonels, you're going to get more of the same. And that's what's happened in the military. And that's why Pete, he came back from Japan, I think he came home from, because he's planning on firing an entire bunch of the generals this week. And we're starting to see it fall with, the Air Force commanding general, or whatever his official title is, was fired this week because he was Chief of Staff, thank you. Because he was focused on woke ideology and all the stuff that doesn't matter to the military. CQ Brown, that was his name. And they fired him. He's gone. The chairman of the Navy, or Secretary of the Navy, I guess, is gone. The new Secretary of the Navy, John Phelan, is focused on lethality also. And he is really fired up to get the Navy back to where it's supposed to be. And so Pete's cleaning house. And the best part about Pete, he's endorsed Defend the Guard a year ago. And then I met with Pete in West Palm Beach in Florida at a private meeting where we talked about Defend the Guard again. And he reiterated his support for it.
I think we got a video on that, I believe.
Yep.
The New Hampshire State House, has passed a bill that would require the United States Congress to declare war before deploying the New Hampshire National Guard. Quote from the bill real quick, reads as follows. Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution vests the Congress with the exclusive power to declare war, and by abdicating the war powers to the executive branch, the United States Congress has failed to follow the United States Constitution and the intent of the founders, Pete.
This caught my eye. It's a really interesting development. Right now, this is New Hampshire only, and New Hampshire is simply pointing out that it's supposed to be Congress that declares war. It has become an executive branch function, and as a result, unless the Congress declares war, New Hampshire doesn't have to send troops for foreign wars. To me, it makes a lot of sense. I spent most of my career as a National Guardsman, deployed multiple times with the National Guard to foreign wars. We got used to the idea that state National Guard are part of expeditionary forces, which is not traditionally the use of a National Guard. And so this is New Hampshire saying, we don't trust how the federal government's going to use our troops, so we're willing to commit them when the American people, through their elected branch in Congress, commits those troops to a foreign war, then you can. I love this idea. I'm sure the National Guard Bureau is, oh no, again. I love states exerting their influence through a system of federalism, and the idea of protecting the prerogative of, why are we sending some young guy from New Hampshire to the eastern province of Afghanistan when you have a northern border problem or floods that happen in New Hampshire and they're not there to be able to provide support for that? it's an interesting development. It'll be interesting to see whether other legislatures do this and how the military reacts to it.
But why are states having to tell the federal government abide by the letter of the Constitution? I love it as well, but it's an unfortunate state of affairs when the states are having to say abide by the text.
Pretty powerful.
That's the top guy. That's Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, and he's on board. You know, I would think with him saying that should have some impact on these generals who are going around naysaying this bill. I would hope it would.
Well, it should. And here's what we found so far is my director of field operations, Diego Rivera, likes to say, telling somebody that Pete Hegseth supports this bill is like giving a cookie to a mouse. So you tell a legislator Pete Hegseth supports it, they want a written letter from Pete. They want a personal phone call from Pete. And so generals show up and say, oh, Pete doesn't mean that now. He meant it then, but he doesn't mean it now. Well, the great Scott Horton, the author of some of the best anti-war books around, Provoked and Enough Already and Fool's Errand, he testified in Wyoming, and he said to the generals in the room, he said, hey, you might be being insubordinate right now. You might want to check in with the boss. And they all kind of laughed him out of the room, but he's right. If the Secretary of Defense supports the bill, the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, supports the bill, the Director of the Counterterrorism Center, Joe Kent, supports the bill, senators and congressmen across the country support the bill, there's something to it. If the only people opposing it are 1-, 2-, and 3-star generals from the National Guard Bureau and the legislators that bend the knee to them, we've got a problem. And that's why we're fighting. And just one last thing to show the demonstration of just how popular this bill is right now. We've got it added to 5 or 6 party platforms of the Republican State Party in 5 or 6 different states. They've added Defend the Guard to their platform as an official plank. The neocon movement of the Republican Party is dead.
I
hope so too. They're the Trotskyites. You want to talk about communists?
Yeah.
The Trotskyites who became the neocons were the original communists. But in Texas, we got Defend the Guard not only put in the party platform, we got to put on the ballot last March in the primary, the presidential primary. And it was as a proposition. It didn't enact the law. It was more like a public poll. And 83% of the voters in the state of Texas supported the bill, outperforming even Donald Trump by 80,000 votes in Texas.
Wow.
And the best part about it was the number of no votes for Defend the Guard was almost identical to the number of votes that supported Nikki Haley. Causation, correlation, I'm not sure, but it's a pretty clear picture. So we know we're on the right track.
Good. Well, and you know, to what was said a minute ago about they want to hear it, do you expect something from the SecDef that's going to come down? I mean, if nothing else, you know what? Hey, National Guard, your mission is now the borders, and your resources are going to be allocated in accordance with that. Any idea of something like that might be in the works?
Yep, absolutely. So we are working every channel we have to get an official statement that is compliant with Department of Defense regulations and federal law. There's certain things you can do and you can't do as far as this policy statements, but we're sure we're going to get it from Pete. We met with Tom Homan in Washington, D.C. the inauguration week, and he's like, Dan, I love this bill. I love the idea of being able to have the full National Guard at my disposal to enforce federal law, immigration standards, homeland defense, security, all of it. He goes, we're going to make this happen. And so between Pete, Tulsi Gabbard, Tom Homan, Kristi Noem, Joe Kent, RFK Jr., by the way, came out and publicly endorsed the bill. The Dream Team supports it. The people that don't support it are the Lindsey Grahams and the Mitch McConnells and the 1- and 2-star generals of the National Guard Bureau. I like my odds. So I think we're going to get an official statement. We're working very hard on it. But I don't want to give anybody the hope that they're going to get that letter. I don't want a squishy legislator to only support Defend the Guard when they've got cover from the federal government. I want a legislator with a little bit of metal in their spine to stand up and say, I'm going to interpose between an overreaching federal government and my own militia and do what's right when it's hard. I'm not looking for squishes. I'm not looking to bail anybody out. I'm nobody's parachute.
Oh, by the way, like we said a minute ago, to uphold the oath they already took.
Amen.
Yeah, that just, you know, but we have this problem across the board. We have it in Tennessee. We have it on state issues, federal issues. It's just as if the constitutions don't exist to these people.
Yep, it's just a recommendation.
Yeah. It's almost when they do their swearing in, it's like it's just a ceremony. It's just a I can't think of the term, but it's ceremonial. It's just a ceremonial function. Seems to be what taking the oath is to most of them. So, like I said, I'm not sure. This is not scheduled yet in Tennessee. But now, you said it's in 30 different states. The bill's being presented this year.
30 states has been introduced in some form. It's worked its way through some of the states. It's had some victories in some committees. Some are waiting for full hearings in the House or full debates in the House or Senate. Everything's moving through. And as you know, state legislatures meet in the first 3 or 4 months of the year, and except for those weird ones that are year-round legislatures like Michigan and I think maybe Florida. So all the battles are happening at once. The first month of January in legislative session is all about rules and committee assignments and pushing through budgets. And so the fights really started about 3 weeks ago, and it's just been nonstop, one after another. In 1 week, we had 3 massive victories in South Dakota, in Wyoming, and Virginia. In Virginia, it passed the House of Delegates, 99-0, where the great Nick Freitas was our sponsor. And he got up there and told a story that his son had just left for MEPS that day to go become an Army Ranger. And this bill did nothing to help his son, but he was there to help his constituents, the National Guard, the military members in his district in Virginia. It was a great presentation, passed 99-0. It went to the Senate where it failed in committee 5-4. And so you can see that we make progress. We take a step forward. We take a half step back. And good legislation takes time. Look around the country. Concealed carry, right to work, all kinds of great legislation has taken 20, 30, 40 years to pass. But we're 5 years into this thing, and we think we're going to get it done in 2 states this year completely on a governor's desk. And when you have 30 more on, bat and cleanup, you feel pretty good about the odds next year. And we're going around the country recruiting good legislators. And then we're training an army to go to war for them. And that's what we're doing in Tennessee, actually, this weekend. I'll be there and teaching a political leadership school after the Libertarian Party State Convention, where I'm speaking with Dr. Peter McCullough, I think his name is. Yep. And on Sunday, I'm sticking around, and I'm going to teach an 8-hour political activism school, teaching average, everyday mom and pop types that don't have 40 hours a week to commit to this stuff, how to be effective, right? There's only a couple things politicians understand, pain and pleasure. And I don't teach anybody how to give a politician pleasure at all. And so we're coming to town, and we're bringing the show with us.
Well, great. So you do that in a lot of different places across the country, then, I take it?
Yep. Anywhere that wants us. We fly in at our own expense. We ask them to have people come, put 30 to 40 people in a room. We ask them to pay a nominal fee just for the room and the food, because we don't take a break for lunch. We work right through it. And I don't want the host of the school to be out of pocket anything. So every penny that is spent on that nominal registration fee goes to pay for the facilities. And then me and my team, we come in 2 of us at a time, and we teach an 8-hour class. And to give you an example of how effective it is, Tucson, Arizona, that's Pima County, one of the bluest counties in the entire country. We started teaching this class there 3 years ago. And in 3 years, we've taken all congressional seats, all state Senate seats, all city council seats, and all school district seats in the bluest county, in one of the bluest counties in the country, because we train angry moms. We train frustrated dads who've lost a son. We train average citizens and teach them how to apply pressure, how to apply pain to people that do a bad job. And we don't do it through a confrontational tone. We do it through a confrontational mechanism. Confrontation is not meant to be angry and loud, it's meant to be effective and purposeful. And we teach people how to do that and use the tools at their disposal without breaking the bank, and just to apply a little bit of pressure to people that are generally weak of spirit.
You know what gets me too about the politicians, around Veterans Day or around Memorial Day or anything having to do with the military, that, they're always there. And they're the biggest patriots then. And then they talk about the Constitution. But most of them have no clue what's in it. And even few of them have any really inclination to uphold it on anything. But this one, I don't understand why, especially after 20-some years, that more of them are not fired up about this.
The threat of losing federal funding is the scariest. It's the second scariest thing for a state legislator. The threat of losing federal money, because that is what they do all of their work with, is federal money. Well, I want to remind them, there's no such thing. There's no such thing as federal money. That is money that the citizens of Tennessee have paid in taxes that has been gifted or stolen by the federal government, and then bribed the states with it to give it back to them, right? So quit being afraid of federal funds. For one, I think it's ridiculous. But the number one thing that they're afraid of isn't the loss of funds. It's the loss of being loved by their constituents, their loss of the power, loss of the ability to be reelected. But the number one concern that these generals bring is funding, and politicians are weak to it. But we do know that the threats are empty. We know who controls the purse strings in Washington. It's Congress. And so no congressman, no bureaucrat or head of any agency, Department of Defense or National Guard Bureau, no single person has put their name on the threat to say, yes, you passed that bill, I'm taking away your toys and your people. No one will, because we know it's a red herring. It's an empty threat.
So tell me exactly why it's an empty threat. Legally, you mentioned that there were safeguards or protections from that. Why is that?
Yeah, number one is that Congress controls the purse strings, right? And no congressman, none, are going to allow their own state to lose federal funding because the state stood up and exerted their right over their militia. That's number one. Number two, the Department of Defense they don't get to allocate the funds. Those are done through Congress, through appropriations bills, right? Their job is to administer the allocation. So Congress sets the amount, they set the purpose, they set the place, and then the DOD and the National Guard Bureau get to administer how that's done. Number two, there's a couple of laws on the books that talk about what has to be done with the funds that Congress allocates. The first one is the purpose statute. I believe it's 31 USC, that the states have to use the funds that Congress allocates them for the purpose that they were given them. All right. So the funds for National Guard funding were given to the states for the payroll, for the administration, and for the readiness of the National Guard. It is not as a bribe or a condition of sending your National Guard to overseas foreign deployments. So it's not going to happen. They can't take away your money because the state stood up and said, we're not going to go to war. And then number three, this bill is specific. Without getting into the nuts and bolts about Title 10 United States Code and Title 32, I don't want to do that. It would bore everybody to death. The state being deployed outside the country, the National Guard is transferred to Title 10. That makes them an active duty soldier, right? When they go on Title 10 orders, they effectively resign from the state National Guard. So once they're in Title 10 status, we have no control over them with this bill. This bill is interposing. It's stopping their activation under Title 10 if it's not for some legal purpose. And again, the Constitution gives three purposes: repel an invasion, put down an insurrection, and enforce the laws of the Union. And then Title 10 of the United States Code gives other purposes. When a war is properly declared by Congress, they can be activated to Title 10. When a national emergency is declared by Congress, when a national emergency is declared by the president. Those are the times when the National Guard can be taken into Title 10. So we're not doing anything that violates federal law. We're putting a stopgap in place where the states say, not today, Satan. You don't have a proper authorization to take our National Guard. We're putting on the brakes. And so if the federal government were to take away 1 penny of National Guard funding because they can't take the boys and girls from Nashville wearing the green uniform and send them to Oman or Djibouti, Africa, there would be a massive lawsuit filed by the state, by every state, that feared that type of overreach was going to happen.
Wow. One of the things you just said, that the Title 10, there were 3 exceptions. Okay, obviously if Congress declares it, but you also said if the president declares a national emergency.
Yep.
And there was one other condition.
Oh, there's a couple in there, actually. There's if Congress declares war, if Congress declares a national emergency, they can authorize the full mobilization and federalization of the National Guard.
Okay.
Or in Title 10, Section 12302, the president can, in a limited capacity, declare a state of emergency and call forth part of the National Guard.
Okay,
and
now
the other one. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. So is that related to the War Powers Act? You said, because you said limited, which is normally 90 days that he can deploy troops in certain situations.
So the War Powers Act of 1973 is a little bit different. That is the president's ability to respond to real-world emergencies anywhere in the world for a very limited period of time with active duty military forces. That's those troops on Title 10. That's active Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine,
right. Okay.
Coast Guard, Space Force, and National Guard troops that are currently activated under Title 10. And that is very limited. It gives them the ability to respond. But anything that's protracted, anything that lasts longer than that immediate response, if you want to take the National Guard and go, Congress should have been doing their job. And they should have been talking about it. Hey, this thing isn't going well. We're going to need an additional authorization. We're either going to go to war or we're going to tell the president to call those people back. And Congress won't do that. And that's the problem, is they've just become just this shill of the deep state. And then you see great people in Congress, some of them, You see Bob Good from Virginia. You guys have what great from Tennessee. And I'm trying to blank on his name. Congressman who's fantastic.
That doesn't ring a bell when you say fantastic congressman from Tennessee.
I'm talking about regarding war powers specifically.
Oh, okay.
And then you see Rand Paul, or you saw Marjorie Taylor Greene. There are folks that are really good. Thomas Massey, Paul Gosar, Andy Biggs, who are really, really good on war powers. Even at one point in time, Bernie Sanders was fantastic on it. Now he's just a complete shill. You see other Democrats. Barbara Lee was fantastic on it, although she's wrong on everything else.
Like Bernie, wrong on everything.
Just like Bernie, right? And so we just want Congress just do your job. I'd rather the Congress not even be in Washington, D.C. I'd rather them do nothing except this one thing. Do nothing. Don't do appropriations. Don't do budgets. Don't do anything. Just control when we go to war, and you will be a successful congressman or senator. But they won't even do that. It's too hard.
Your website, I'm sure, I know we got it, we can stick it up here, but now I'm sure you have a donate button. People can donate to help with the cause, I'm sure.
Absolutely. So we have a group. We'll take individual donors all day, every day, but we are funded primarily on what we call the Remnant, and it's an organization inside of our organization. We call it our supporters club, and the Remnant is a group of people out there that know the truth, right? That are quietly waiting for an opportunity to rise up, and they don't really know who to follow. They don't know how to do it, but they know the truth. They feel it in their heart, and we're giving them like a moth to a flame. We're giving them that bright light to come and gather with us, fight with us, and we call them our remnant. It's kind of just a tip of the hat to the book of Isaiah in the Bible. And those donors are anywhere from $10 to $50 a month after month, and they're able to donate at bringourtroopshome.us/remnant. And they're the most important people in our movement because gas in the tank costs money. We don't waste one single penny of donor money. We are very lean. I pay for all my own travel and the travel of my guys out of my own pocket. But the organization itself, for printing, emailing, by the way, emailing a list of 250,000 people 3 times a week is expensive. But it has to be done. It has to be done because you have to communicate with the masses. And if you don't communicate, the message dies and the remnant begins to scatter again.
Yeah. Did you guys do like annual fundraisers or anything?
We haven't yet. We're like I said, we're a 3-man group, 3 people. 2 are paid, 3 are on the staff. But we are getting ready to do probably our first big fundraiser this year in the spring. We've done things where we've spoken on the National Mall at the Rage Against the War Machine rally. We've had that event I talked about in DC in 2019, but none of them have ever been for the purpose of asking for money. I'm averse to asking for money. It doesn't come natural to me. Right. And so I think that if our cause is just, people will find us. But it's not necessarily true. Sometimes you have to be very aggressive. But I am going to Philadelphia in 3 weeks, to talk about a fundraising strategy with one of our best allies, the Citizens Alliance people. I don't know if you know them at all, but they're fantastic. They ran the Pennsylvania Chase this year and helped flip Pennsylvania for President Bush by knocking on doors and chasing absentee ballots that were missing. Incredible organization. And we're going out there to meet with them.
President Trump, right?
What did I say?
You said Bush.
Oh, dear. Oh. All right, Jesus, please forgive me. Me and the Bush family we don't have a great relationship. I'd like to say I'm an abused spouse because of them.
Well, I think a lot of people's eyes have been opened about the Bushes. Something else too. We've already mentioned that it's all you're really doing is asking them to follow the Constitution. But we just had President's Day last week, and in Washington, one of the things he warned against were these entangling alliances. Now, he was thinking mostly about Europe, but, it was not like, okay, you can go get entangled anywhere but Europe. I mean, this whole garbage about being involved in everything in the Middle East, it's ridiculous. It drives me up the wall. That is not our area. That's not what we need to be focused on, especially now, for all these years, we were led to believe that, well, that's where all the oil is, and that's where all the energy is. But we've known for decades now that that's not true. We could have been energy independent decades ago, but we weren't willing to do it, or the people in power weren't willing to allow us. Let's put it that way.
Right. Well, they can't run their grift and their scam and their money laundering operations through North Dakota. They have to run them through the Ukraine or through the Middle East, and. But you're absolutely right. We could have been energy independent. We could, and I think we are the greatest nation on earth, but we could be expanding our greatness and our power and our influence to the rest of the world without having the barrel of a gun and a soldier in a green uniform doing it. We could do it through our economic exceptionalism and through the demonstration of what a good and noble and ethical and moral people look like. But I don't think anybody in the world really trusts us, especially with what we're discovering right now with USAID and that whole debacle.
Yep.
We're learning so much about just how evil the back channels of our government are and how they work to every side of an issue. Like in Syria, we were funding the Foreign Defense was funding one side of the fight, the CIA was funding another, and USAID was funding the third side. We had American dollars shooting at American dollars. And I don't think Syria is the first time that's happened. In fact, we know it's not. But we've got to just reel ourselves in and just do the basics. That's why the president's mantra of America first, it wasn't his. He didn't create that.
Right.
He just did what Trump did. He turned it gold, right? He found the 80-20 issues and took the 80% side and made the idiots defend the 20% side and turned America first into the greatest slogan in the modern our modern life. Yeah. And if we just would make decisions based on those two words, America first, I think a lot of these problems would go away.
Absolutely. Any closing thoughts?
I can't wait. I hope people from Tennessee will come see us in Chattanooga this weekend. Again, the Libertarian State Party convention is in town. I'm the keynote speaker there. And then stick around for Sunday for the school. And then if nothing else, please, www.defendtheguard.com/phone bank. We need 50 more volunteers to work our phone banks. And we actually don't just phone bank in any one state. Every time we have a hearing in any state or a floor vote in a state, we call up the phone bank and we change votes. We change hearts and minds daily. I've seen it happen where we went into a committee hearing. We were down 7 votes going into it the day of, and the phone bank's activated, and we had 150, 200, 300 people calling in, asking them to support the bill, and we flipped the bill and got it out of committee with unanimous support. And so just please join the phone bank. If you can chip in a few bucks, we'd love it. But if nothing else, at night when you go to bed, drop to your knees and just pray for our country, pray for the Constitution, and for the men and women in uniform around the world who are being deployed and misused.
Absolutely. And remember, in Tennessee, it's House Bill 0129 by Michelle Renaud and Senate Bill 0156 by Senator Hensley. Not scheduled yet, but it's going to be coming up, and we'll need your support to get that through. Hey, thanks
Absolutely.
Again for what you do, and thanks for being with us. Love to have you back.
I'll be anytime, Dave.
Well, hey, take care. Hey, I've got some event announcements and information about our guests next week in just a few minutes. Remember, we will do a legislative update for our second show tonight at 8:30 Central. Topics will include firearms, finance, and election integrity. Other legislation will be discussed as well, to include nullification legislation. I hope to get that through this year. I want to thank you all for taking the time to watch our program tonight. Please be sure to hit the like and subscribe button as well as the notification bell so you never miss an episode. We appreciate your support. Check out our radio podcast on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and other platforms as well. Sign up for our weekly newsletter at our website, TNinformer.com. Find and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. The nullification process bill has new numbers: House Bill 0441, sponsored by Representative Holsey, and Senate Bill 0479, sponsored by Senator Bolden. No schedule yet for the committee, but the House bill is assigned to the Public Service Subcommittee, and the Senate bill is assigned to the State and Local Government Committee. Now, I understand that Senator Bolden wants to go through the Senate committees first. She's put it on notice, so that means it'll be scheduled. We don't know yet whether it'll be scheduled for next week or the week after that, and I'll be talking about that a little bit more in the next show. More information on this, visit tncss.weebly.com. Everything having to do with nullification in our Constitution. Better yet, sign up for the Substack on the website to get the latest updates on nullification. The Stewart County GOP will meet this Thursday, 6:30 p.m. at the Stewart County Visitor Center to discuss reorganization scheduled for March 27th. Next week, our guest will be retired FBI agent David Baldovan as he remembers Philip Haney, who opposed the deep state and died under suspicious circumstances. We'll look at what he was trying to warn us about when he was found dead. That's it for now. Good night from Paris, Tennessee, that is.